Three.
Yep.
Good morning. It is the 24th of March, 2019. We're here at the Atlantis Social Zen Center. The fourth Sunday of each month, we give a style of contemporary teaching. In this case, we're still in BohdiDharma month, so I'm going to be making some comments about BohdiDharma that I'm using in my text, the manuscript that we're looking to publish soon. I'd like to give Joseph his book back. Thank you so much.
You don't want to hang on to it?
We'll bring this back next year. We're not sure we're going to keep the same rotation, but Nagarjuna was February BohdiDharma. So I think we're a little bit starting with India and then going through China as we go through the year, or something like that, sort of chronologically. Before we start, I wanted to say something that report to you on our last board meeting, where we discussed, as always, finances of the temple, of the center. And we do our best to try to communicate about this, but it's a known issue. I had a long talk with Yusin Yuen, who stepped aside for a while as our treasurer. She's gotten into complicated situations in her own life that she's struggling with. And she was saying at San Francisco, LA, she's lived at these centers and practiced and so forth. It's always the same issue. One of our guys visited San Francisco and was there for a couple of weeks. And toward the end, they invited him to attend a board meeting. And the board meeting was all about trying to get the residents to go out and fundraise on the streets, try to hand out pamphlets and stuff like that. And they said, well, we don't want to do that. So I think it's important that full disclosure, that people know where the money goes. Remember John Prine tune? There's a hole in Daddy's arm where all the money goes. But, well, I'm one of the holes where the money goes around here, but not all of it. So what I did is I put together a recap from the meeting, showed it to L'Oreal and Brian are on the board. And so I'm going to read through it quickly here, and it's posted so that you all know that we are a not-for-profit corporation chartered in 1977. We moved here in 2000, and we've been in continuous operation for over 40 years, serving and growing Sangha. Your donations help maintain the facility and to fund the minister's household expense for myself. Our total annual budget averaged around $60,000 per year. That's sort of our nut, including overhead and support for myself. Rent and upkeep averages at a minimum $2,500 to $3,000 per month, depending on utilities and extraordinary expenses, or $36,000 to $40,000 per year. Full residency, when we have full residency, covers most of the rent, but increases utilities slightly. Then by minister's household expense, you're allowed minister's household expense by law, whether you're church or whether you're not-for-profit, where expenses we have at home, including things like towels, and depends on how diligent you want to be about this. And Diane handles all of our personal bookkeeping, so it's kind of a burden, but you can deduct all of those things against this income. So if you do it right, you can sort of come out with no taxes on this income, but you have to show all the expenses. That's the way it works. So I receive $18,000 a year, my allowance, $1,500 a month from ASCC, but no salary or benefits, none. An additional $12,000 was approved by the board in 2010. That was before most of you were here, but remains unfunded. I also receive additional income and voluntary contributions, dana from events here, as well as from the extended Sangha, the Silent Thunder Order. The total dana to me every year from those sources averages about $30,000. So that with the 18 is around 48. So there are other, I make money from art. My dealer called last night at 9 o'clock and it just sold another big piece, which is great.
Dealer might not be a good word.
But that is what they call them.
Agent.
No, they have a word, it's gallerist. My gallerist,
I like agent.
my gallerist,
That's a different.
I call him my dealer.
They're very similar.
So then
Yeah, right.
then if, you don't need to know all the warts and all, but you know, there's Social Security and things like that. So we cobble it together. But if we could get up to the extra 12,000 a year, that would be very helpful. So the last paragraph just says, please consider how much you value your participation in ASCC and determining your level of contribution, which is much appreciated. We've set a goal of 80,000 a year to provide a rainy day cushion and to fund an increase in my compensation, as discussed. So it tells you how to go become a supporting member. So I think it's important that along with our pleas for support, we kind of let you know where the money goes and what it's for, right? And as Brian mentioned this morning, it's also for your practice of Dharma. And we want to encourage everybody to practice generosity, but it seems self-serving for me to say that because I'm the only one taking the money home. Anyway.
Yeah, but every church, every nonprofit has a
That's right.
CEO or that's on salary or
That's right.
You know, a priest.
Yep. And they can be paid.
It's not anything abnormal.
And then just along those lines, I mean, you know, as I'm sitting and listening over the years to you speak, I mean, the depth doesn't just of
Sucking up.
it doesn't come like, you know, like I have to make a living. Therefore, so much of my time is based on increasing my skill set so I can make a living. And so this stuff just doesn't magically appear for us, and it takes either a commitment of the dedication to the practice and the knowledge and the study. You know, you didn't mail order your robes and get them. You didn't work for it.
You have to jump through some hoops.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just.
Additionally, as a designer, I've reformatted all of our graphics and collateral material and done all that. But we kind of make that up by selling. When we replenish the books and things, we kept the Elliston Design Association Corporation open, so that we provide, when we replenish collateral material, we just bill ASCC and ASCC reimburses us. And then we have similar arrangements with affiliates. So it all adds up. Not too much, but it adds up. So today, we're still with BohdiDharma, but we want to take a little different angle on him. And some of the quotes today that I use may be redundant from last week. How many were here last week? Okay, so not too many. The manuscript is called The Original Frontier. We have a publisher who is interested in doing it. I've been working with their editors. And the subhead is The Serious Seeker's Guide to Zen, Rediscovering the Trusting Mind in the New Age of Uncertainty. So it's meant to somewhat place Zen in the current cultural context, which is what all the Zen teachers of the past have had to do. That's why the teaching seems to change so much from India to China to Japan and so forth. They're adapting it to the culture of the time. So this is an effort in that direction. There's another manuscript like this that's called Razor Blade Zen, or the Razor's Edge, something like that, like showing how Zen goes right down the middle between the extremes of rationalism on one end and the extremes of theism on the other. So it's a little more placing it in the social context, literally. This one is more personal. This is for each reader, each of you individually, to begin to see how, in the context of the chaos and stuff that we're facing in today's life, especially in the West here, it's even worse in many other parts of the world, how Zen might help. Okay. So again, the chapters or the sections are introducing the original frontier, designing a Zen life, differentiating Zen meditation from all other forms of meditation, finding workarounds in your practice, deconstructing the senses, which is a very long chapter on each sense, what the kind of things that occur, in meditation, embracing non-duality, applying Zen to life, benefiting from Zen, following the sages, and concluding Zen, and then finally the original frontier, a little more on that. So then in the introduction, I say the original frontier I speak of is not limited to any one place, and it does not exist in a limited span of time. It is always here and now, ready, willing, and able to meet us and greet us where we are. It always has been. This is the point of no return we approach in Zen, the frontier of consciousness itself. From the comfort zone of our familiar reality, we enter the strange territory discovered by Buddha, explored and settled by his descendants. After all, it has not gone anywhere. There's nowhere for it to go. And I quote Dogen here, saying where the entrance is, the way is completely present where you are. So of what use is practice or enlightenment? Another translation says, traveling elsewhere or to find enlightenment, right? However, if there's the slightest difference in the beginning between you and the way, the result will be a greater separation than between heaven and earth. The slightest dualistic thinking arises, you will lose your Buddha mind. So the proper use of Zen practice is precisely to overcome the seeming gap between you and the great way, exaggerated as it is by dualistic thinking. So that's kind of the introduction. And what I want to do is just go to the mentions of BohdiDharma, of which there are about 20 in here, and give you a little bit of the context in each. So many who seek out to Zen today have read extensively about it and may have already discovered that there is something almost miraculous about its simple meditation. The testimony of Zen's ancestors in the form of the written record of its transmission from Buddha to India, in India to BohdiDharma, who brought it to China, and the great masters responsible for its transmission to the East through China, Korea, and Japan. Remember, it was going east. We think of it as coming from the west, right? It's going east and it comes around. That's why they say BohdiDharma never came from the west. Just depends where you are. Which way, what is the west? What is the east? That's one of the great Zen things. But this transmission is evidence that Zen has the power to transform lives. Many ancestors went to great lengths, even risking injury and death, to find the real Zen. And then I jump to when pundits in China, I'm jumping because I don't jump in the text, but I'm jumping here. When pundits in China would come to quiz BohdiDharma, the story goes, he would turn his back on them facing the wall. This was a big cliff of the mountain. They interpreted this as wall-gazing Zen, quote unquote, presuming he was using the mountain wall of his cave as an object of contemplation, or chan. But the 28th patriarch was not demonstrating contemplation. He was just precisely sitting, Japanese shikantaza, in which there is no object of contemplation. Thus, Zen, phonetic Japanese for Chan, which is phonetic for jhana, turns out to be something of a misnomer. Zazen may be regarded as contemplation of a totally different order. No specific object selected from nature, no sutras or assigned riddle or koan as in Rinzai Zen. We do not even contemplate the blank wall we are facing. You could say that we contemplate reality itself, or its salient aspects such as impermanence. But more simply, sit until you forget there is someone sitting, as Sensei suggested. Anytime anybody wants to stop me, just raise your hand. So this is in the section that is about all the reasons I can't do Zen. Don't have enough time. It's too painful. It's number 1 and 2, right? And so I go through about, 15 or 20 of these. This one is more like an assertion that means I don't have to do Zen. I can meditate in the midst of everyday activity without having to sit still. Okay, these are some of these you could say are excuses. I have, and I'm going to skip a little bit here. Some think they can do meditation while totally disregarding the idea of taking up a specific physical form. They may define meditation as getting into the flow of running, other exercises such as yogic stretching, or just paying hyper attention to everyday activities. Go with the flow, going with the flow. I think I'm fine. I have met adherents, is that the way you pronounce that word? Adherents? People that adhere to this, of Dzogchen, in parentheses, Tibetan meaning great perfection, who claim that this is why they do not practice any discipline, such as seated meditation. Instead, they simply engage with every emerging event as the focus of their practice. This is appealing in its simplicity and relieving of the burden of the regimen. Here's where BohdiDharma comes in. This is close to the connotation of practice in BohdiDharma's time, I understand. Intently observing the behavior of ourselves and others, the three actions of body, speech, and mind, as well as noting our underlying motivations, witnessing whether or not they conform to the Buddhist precepts, for example. Seated meditation, by contrast, which we call practice today, right, comprised a kind of analysis, observing whether or not one's direct experience evidenced the tenets of Buddhism, such as that of emptiness. Right? And a little aside here, if emptiness is real, how does it look? How does it sound? How does it feel? Right? Do we have any direct experience of something we could say is confirming this emptiness? Well, that's what they meant by analysis. So this is in the area of try this. And this one is about, I can get enough out of just reading about Zen without meditating. Well, it's sometimes called bedroom Zen. So the
Did you say bedroom?
bedroom Zen, they call it.
In music, we call it like a bedroom.
Oh,
You
Yeah.
just stay at home and you play friends.
That's right. The last thing at night, you read something about Zen and you go peacefully go to sleep.
You can still do.
You can still do it. So in the try this, each of these has this thing, and then it goes on and it says try this, and it has something. So this says, for the present, read only what is inspiring and when it is encouraging. If you find yourself reading instead of sitting, put the book down for a while. You can always get back to it. It's a book. Next time you meditate, you might bring this into sharper focus. Consider something that you have recently read about meditation or its implications. Then examine whether or not you actually find anything like that in your own experience, the type of analytical meditation practiced in the time of BohdiDharma. It differs from focusing on a koan, but we do not recommend it for the long term. Eventually, drop the analysis and get back to just sitting. Okay? So that's in that section of the do's and don'ts. There's another one in the same section. Meditation leads to enlightenment. So some of these are not exactly assertions, but beliefs, right? Memes, cultural memes. No one can claim that Zazen, this is my comment, no one can claim that Zazen is the sole cause of the effects of Zen, including spiritual awakening. No one can even make the case that it is necessary to do Zazen in order to experience awakened mind. There is no provable cause-effect relationship there. This point was made long ago by BohdiDharma himself. This is the quote. But BohdiDharma's approach to Zen was unique. As he says in these sermons, quote, seeing your nature is Zen. Not thinking about anything is Zen. Everything you do is Zen. While others viewed Zen as purification of the mind or as a stage on the way to Buddhahood, BohdiDharma equated Zen with Buddhahood and Buddhahood with mind, the everyday mind. This suggests that Zen's insight is everyday, is my comment, not dependent upon Zazen. Though the wall-gazing Zen attributed to BohdiDharma was indisputably not jhana, contemplation, but objectless meditation, shikantaza. In spite of the lack of causal connection, Zazen seems entirely necessary for most people to appreciate Zen. Its primary function is to overcome ingrained impediments to insight, which is why it requires such an investment of time. we carry a lot of baggage. Okay. Do you want to stop and see if anybody has anything to say? We have a few more. Thank God for the search function. Thank Buddha for the search function.
Seems like in the beginning when we're like on newcomers and stuff like that, when we're teaching people count their breath and stuff like that, that we kind of start in the beginning with something more akin to jhana or the Zen that apparently is, or the Zen that's now the wrong word for what we actually do. It seems like that we kind of start with jhana. We start with focusing on breath. You want to talk about maybe that and then the transition and how you would expect that we would teach this to newcomers?
And in another section here, I talk about the fact that almost all meditation forms, there's a lot of good quotes from Daniel Goleman on the meditative experience. He's sort of a classic book that was written about all this back in the 60s, and he revised it later. And he talks about all of these different ones. And they all have these characteristics in common. And one is typically that's kind of a two-step. There's in shamatha, which is stilling the mind, and then vipassana. Right? So you don't expect vipassana insight right away. You have to still the mind first. And in Zen, we tend to, and I talk about this a lot, the models, the different formulae and stuff like that Rinzai and others came up with to try to help their students. We don't take those as literal, but we see them as being, expedient means for teaching. So yes, I would say when we start out, we're basically hoping that the mind will calm down. And Soto Zen, and maybe even Rinzai, but we say mind and body can't separate, so we make the body sit. And when the body becomes still, the mind has to become still eventually. But you can't make your mind still by sheer will or sheer force. So they were asking yesterday, one of the young students kept asking, what's the difference between Zen meditation and all the others? And when we showed him the stick,
He shut up.
they got very excited about it. But remember the young girl who was sitting next to the first one who kept asking for it. Once I gave it to the first, I'm glad I didn't give it to her first, because when I gave the girl the stick sitting next to her, she said, "Oh, I'm out." So she didn't want it, but a bunch of them did. I said, well, there's one difference, right? And the eyes, the thing about not closing the eyes, different things like that. But the main thing is that we don't separate the physical and the mental and all those things from the beginning. So we understand all these teachings are provisional, and they're meant to get you started until you get to the point that you don't have to have that teaching. That's what you're talking about, right? You definitely start in the same place. Everybody does. We're sitting in form to begin with.
No, I was just thinking in the beginning when you're teaching Zazen to somebody or teaching Shikantaza, like when we're doing newcomers on Wednesday, a lot of times different people, I know that it's the same pattern, but a lot of times people will say, maybe count your breath, right? Which in a way seems like an object of meditation, so you're counting your breath. Or if you find that you're sort of daydreaming and you are no longer meditating, you focus on your posture and you focus on your breath again, and you kind of sit up straight. And it seems in a way that's kind of an anchor, even though it's not something that you're focusing on all the time.
The teachings are structured in such a way that they are appropriate to the audience. And if you look at the arc of Buddha's history, it was like that. In the beginning, he had to teach ways that were very similar to Hinduism, and then try to illustrate the differences. Toward the end of his teaching, the Lotus Sutra, he was contradicting the earlier teachings. So he was able to teach more contradictory, dichotomous, complex non-duality kind of teachings, which the section non-duality is more around that. So Tibetans say, don't try to teach newcomers emptiness. That just sort of confuses everything. Why should I even do this then?
I just a comment on that. I was teaching beginners and I would teach them the counting the breath. I'd have them sit doing that, and then I have them sit. And their feedback was like, this counting the breath stuff's like Mickey Mouse stuff. they all wanted just to sit, you know, and I was like, oh, I count the breath all the time because I have a lot of anxiety, you know. But when you have an audience of like 30 people, some people will just, they'll go to one or the other, you know.
Counting the breaths we present as provisional teaching, like all teachings. And what it does, it's nothing magical. It just helps you focus your attention on the breath in a way that you can tell that you're still focusing on the breath. Eventually it falls away and you just observe the breath. But there's nothing magical about observing the breath. It's just that we don't. Simplest thing that keeps us alive, we don't pay attention to.
Is it just teaching step by step, getting deeper into it? I mean, you don't want to go straight to
That's right.
a master's class.
That's right.
Whatever you're doing, you want to go to 101,
That's
102,
right.
103.
And the same thing for the physical. You don't expect a newcomer to sit through a 10-day retreat. You know, 15-minute
Who can
periods.
do that? Nobody.
I've seen a couple of newcomers go through it, but it's not recommended. Trauma, it's like, it's not exactly, it's not aversion therapy. There's another more sophisticated term when you're afraid of heights. You know, you climb up the tower and just look out the first window. And,
Exposure. Yeah. Exposure therapy.
Yeah, exposure therapy. And later you go up to the next window and, so, but you don't go all the way up and look over the edge and re-traumatize, right? So it's the same thing. We're gradually sinking into the pool of quicksand, you know, a little bit at a time, and deeper and deeper.
I'm gonna ask one more question about that just before we leave it, and then I'm gonna ask a question. But it does seem that there are two different ways to teach meditation. One of them is kind of the training wheels method, or not to teach, but to teach shikantaza, right? And then you read like the introduction to Soto Zen by Itsuko Mura's book in there, right? And he said, you know, none of that, like no toys, no tools, no training wheels. Like that was not the way I was taught. That's not the way I teach it. And I guess I'm always concerned that people might come in here and because there isn't any of that, they're just sitting there daydreaming, right? That there's a difference between daydreaming and shikantaza. And I guess that's always my concern with newcomers is it's like they don't want to follow the breath. It may be because they just want to sit there and let their mind do whatever their mind does and pretend that that's shikantaza.
Amusement park ride in
Yeah.
the mind, basically.
Right, because that's easy, right? It's a lot easier to sit here
Right.
and distract yourself from the fact that this is really boring and, you know, hard.
I think,
Yeah.
I take their self-reporting at pretty much face value after having done that for a while, and the people, and I tell them I tell them it's not good to have like this blissful mind, it's bad to have a wildfire mind. And you know, I open up, and a lot of them, it's interesting. A lot of them can sink right into it, and they want it because they're used to their phones and all that stuff. And so it's in a way, if I had to say by gender, the women are going to sink into it quicker, and a lot of the guys just say like, or you get like an athletic guy who'd be like, I just felt like I would go insane sitting here, nothing. You know? So I think some can do it, some can't. You know, some want to do, you know, but like when they talk about it, you can see like the person say like everybody's saying, you can see that actually happened for them, and then for the people that say like, oh, my mind was just like. Like this one woman was like a young woman. She's like, I just start thinking how the universe is like just expanding and expanding and expanding and keeps going. I was like, okay, good. That's a good start, you know. So I'm not so concerned that they're just I'm concerned that I'm just daydreaming on them.
Well, I'm probably projecting onto them, and it's the same thing with me, right? You know, I just want to make sure people aren't doing what I'm doing. You know, as long as you're not doing what I'm doing, you're fine, really.
It might be a journeyman concern because I think when you're a beginner, you're like, let's try it.
Yeah.
You have to remember that what we're doing is not Oprah Winfrey. You know, what we're doing is not come to a big lecture in a lecture hall. All of you have been here again and again and practicing again and again. So you're like at least intermediate, right, in your practice. We understand that you cannot, unless you have an extremely talented person walk through the door the first time, superior, ripe and ready to fall off the limb, you know, nothing's going to happen. And it's going to take, again, repetition, again, until subliminally we mature on the cushion. Things are going on all unknown to us. just sorting a lot of this out and helping us get to the point that we begin to get the teaching, you know. But the teacher can't do that. This is not like information exchange. This is more like teasing, setting up, encouraging, and getting people to try it. And then once they start trying it, you know, I could, if I had kept diligent records, I could read you some of the Dokusans from, say, Mike Goldman 20 years ago, and they would be laughable compared to Mike Goldman today, right? So we recognize that it's a life kind of commitment. It's not a class where you're going to get it, you know, you're going to get some information, have knowledge, not like that. But those of us who are propagating it, we fall into those traps and think, well, maybe we need to do a better job of doing it this way. That might help one or two people in that newcomer group if you do make that change. But most of it's 100% dependent upon them, not us.
I've mentioned this before, so maybe I want to get your back on this, but you know, Leonard Cohen, there's a great interview with him, Shambhala's son. Everyone knows who Leonard Cohen is. He was a Zen monk for 5 years, and it's a great interview because it just completely dispels any romanticism you have about being involved in Zen or being a Zen monk. And so the interviewer was a practitioner, but they said, well, what's it like doing all that sinning? He says, well, for the first 6 months, you just go through every sexual fantasy you can possibly imagine, right? Every variation you can possibly imagine. Because you just get really tired of that. And then he says, and then after that, you go through every revenge fantasy of everyone has ever wronged you or you think wronged you.
We're going to restructure the koans along those lines.
Yeah. He's like, and then you get tired of that, and then you are really kind of just sitting.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if that process of daydreaming.
Well, if you look at the skandhas, you know, form, feeling or sensation, perception, impulse or motivation, consciousness. The Sharingama Sutra presents this model that you basically sort of go through those. At first, everybody's sitting in forms, the material world, right? And so all of our experiences of pain and resistance, and eventually it shifts into sensation, where you kind of become numb now, at least physically, right? And it's become physically comfortable. So now you're sitting in sensation only. You've left form behind, you might say. Shifts into perception. You can't even define sensation as sensation anymore. It's becoming, you're adapting. You're adapting on a very deep psychological level, you might say. Then it shifts into this conduct of motivation, impulse. Why are we doing this? And we run out of reasons why we're doing this. So there's not even any motivation anymore. And it ultimately becomes consciousness only. You have to admit that you're conscious, but you can't really say that you're any longer sitting in the realm of form or sensation. It's all sort of canceled out and neutralized. Well, you can't teach a newcomer that. You deal with where they are. They're sitting in form. They're going to have pain. They're going to have this. They're going to have that. You encourage them. This too shall pass. You'll get through this.
Yeah, my experience of sitting, like regards to daydreaming,
I get some more tea.
Has sort of been what Joseph was talking about, where with a little what you were just saying, where I sit down and for a few minutes I mostly focused on the physical sensation of it until I get sort of comfortable, and then my mind just rapidly just burns through everything I've been reading for the last few days until I've just made all of the connections that I have to make between all the books I'm reading until I get bored of it.
Right.
And it's really made me realize that I have to sit more. Like it made me intensify my practice, because I was like, well, if I only sit once a week, then I spend the whole time burning through all these connections.
You get tired of it at some point.
Yeah. So I have to sit all the time so that I can go ahead and get tired of it and move past it.
Yeah, you're hoping that happens quicker and quicker.
Yeah,
and I think it does. By the way, I didn't mention that this book is structured slightly differently. It talks about I introduce the 6 senses, and we talk about them as thieves and things in here later, more abstractly. But the 6 senses in the beginning, how are they spelled out in Buddhism? They're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. Right? Thinking is the 6th sense. But what I'm saying in here is when you first sit down, it's not seeing. You're not confronting seeing. It's just exactly what Tom said. You immediately start confronting feeling, right? Body sensation comes first because you got pain in your leg, pain in your back, right? That's where so these are structured in, the chapters here are structured in a sequence of the resistance we confront in Zazen. The first barrier level of resistance we confront in Zazen is physical, the pain, the difficulty of sitting still for a long period of time. There's emotional and psychological levels of it as well, mental. But then the second one is, again, not seeing or hearing, it's thinking, right? The second barrier that comes up is crazy monkey mind. Once you get comfortable, guess what?
Yeah.
Now you're dumped into this madness of the monkey mind, right? So, and then sometimes the physical discomfort comes back. It depends on if you wrench your back that day or something else, right? And as you age, you know, your recovery period is a lot longer. So we go through them in the book here as first it's body sensation. That's the first thing you confront. Resistance in Zazen. That's the most important. How do you get through that? Then the next one is thinking. Then I think I put seeing third because I'm a visual trained person for me personally. And I put smelling and tasting last because this is in level of resistance. They adapt so quickly, there's just nothing there. There's no pushback. But in seeing there is, and then I put hearing next. Hearing is next, for me at least. Now hearing may come first for you in terms of resistance. But in terms of resistance, I think seeing is more because that's where most of our information comes from. And that's where we're keeping our world still, according to Buddha, and trying to maintain sanity, right? When your vision starts falling apart, you start freaking out, right? Your hearing can go crazy and it's not so bad, right? So that's the way I structured the six senses, and the sequence in which we confront them in Zazen is the most important. But we say, you know, what was Buddha's original teaching? Well, anyway, we confront them sort of backwards in actuality. The Eightfold Path starts with right view, right thought. You don't start with right view and right thought. You know, you start with right meditation, which is the eighth. So it's backwards.
I was wondering if it replicates the death process.
The death process?
Yeah, I wonder if what we're confronting in Zazen is what
I wouldn't be
happens,
surprised.
like sequentially when you die, you have to go through pain,
They
physical pain.
They say every one of your organs has the ability to shut down the pain response in the brain once it starts caving or crashing. Every organ in the body, this is what I've heard, can shut off that pain reaction. So there's like a built-in drug, you know, that can neutralize the pain. Endorphins, whatever.
It reminds me of the process of falling asleep. Like your
That's
body,
not so point of sleep.
like loses all of the sensations of the reality around you, and then all of a sudden it just starts flashing images.
But you're still seeing, you're still hearing,
Yeah.
and you may suddenly start like you feel like you're falling off a cliff or something.
I'm a little, my vision, my hearing is the part that when I meditate, I notice, I hear everything, vision kind of shuts down.
Yeah, so hearing may be more resistant for you, but that's your profession too.
Right, and that's, I hear the air conditioner, I hear when someone
Right.
walks in front of the door
Right.
of the air
Yeah.
conditioner, that makes a different
Yeah.
tone. I hear birds, I hear cars.
Yeah.
And the sight thing is kind of like, when you're an engineer mixing a show, you're not really
No.
looking at the stage, you're listening.
No.
So
No.
the sight goes first. for me.
So you're highly attuned in that way, and I'm highly attuned visually. But I'll give you a little secret. I was sitting one night, I've told this story before, at the last period with Okamura Rishi, and I leaned to one side and went brrrr.
You're back.
I leaned to this and brrrr, and forward brrrr, backward brrrr. The motor muscles kick in along the spine when you lean to the side, and you can actually hear them. And the other thing is keeping your gaze fixed. There's a certain ambient sound, like a dissonant chord in your mind. It's all like your brain is full of
That's called tinnitus.
It's got a real range if it is.
It's really there. We all have it.
I think doctors don't know what tinnitus is.
Oh,
I'm sorry, apologies to the medical profession. I don't think they know this about it. But so what happened? Mary had a little lamb. I talk about this in here, right? So Mary had a little lamb going through and through your mind. I'm crazy with it. You listen, you go, you'll hear that tone. It's there. It's going to be outside, inside, but it's like your brain is full of sound emitting diodes. They're going all the time. There's all kinds of sound coming from inside as well. But what you notice is when you're sitting still enough, long enough, with fixed gaze, if you look over here, that sound changes. The pitch changes. You look back, it reverts back to where it was. You look over here, it changes.
We can change.
So they're overlapping. It's like a Venn diagram. Yeah, they're like a Venn diagram. The senses overlap. They're not separate. Not 100%. And synesthetes would prove this. You know, people have this. They see color associated with sound. They hear sounds associated with colors and so on.
The default mode network in your brain shuts down.
Default mode network.
Yeah, I mean, like you know, a bunch of areas that are connected in your brain that sort of filter out unnecessary information. And,
I think that's what the brain does. That's one theory.
Yeah, it's like a reducing valve, right? That whole idea. But when you shut down that default mode network, all of a sudden your senses start to kind of overlap and you get more of that synesthesia. Same thing happens on psychedelics.
Yep. That's the, what did Freud call it for the baby in the crib? It was, can't remember the name he used. It was like
Oceanic, something. Yeah. I can't remember.
Undifferentiated, you know.
Like
Oceanic awareness. Oceanic awareness.
like this information overload.
Yeah, you just can't differentiate anything anymore into the senses or anything. It's like just one sea of data, sense data flowing. And the theory in the psychedelics is they shut that down. They don't add anything. They just turn off that filter, and then here it comes. So enough on that. We'll go forward. So this is in the deep dive into the six senses. Deconstructing the senses is probably the longest chapter in here, where I go through all of them, again, in the order in which we confront them in meditation. So the senses are this is introductory to that section. The senses are sometimes referred to as the six thieves, capitalized, in that they can steal our birthright, spiritual insight. In its place, they offer the seductive distraction of sensory pleasures. Though we engage the senses intensively in Zen, it is in order to transcend them ultimately. The aforementioned BohdiDharma has this to say about that. Cultivating the paramitas means purifying the six senses by overcoming the six thieves. Casting out the thief of the eye by abandoning the visual world is charity. Keeping out the thief of the ear by not listening to sounds is morality. Humbling of the thief of the nose by equating all smells as neutral is patience. There's an old saying, to the enlightened, all odors are perfumes. Controlling the thief of the mouth by conquering desires to taste, praise, and explain is devotion. Now notice he's moving beyond the physical there into the culture by explaining, praising, and so forth. The actions of the tongue and language are included. And quelling the thief of the body by remaining unmoved by sensations of touch is meditation. And taming the thief of the mind by not yielding to delusions but practicing wakefulness is wisdom. I like wakefulness better than mindfulness, mainly because it's been so corrupted by mindfulness meditation, the fad of the day. So these six paramitas are transports. Like boats or rafts, they transport beings to the other shore. Hence they're called ferries. So that was... but I go on to mention that we don't take that aggressive an attitude. I say here, the rather contentious relationship implied between the senses subduing the band of thieves by frustrating their nefarious activities may be a bit overwrought for the newcomer to Zen. I want to repeat that for Joseph. The rather contentious relationship implied between the senses, subduing the band of thieves by frustrating their nefarious activities, may be a bit overwrought for the newcomer to Zen. We tend to emphasize a more relaxed sensory adaptation process, one that values collaboration over confrontation. Collaboration with your senses, right? That's a funny idea. That's my idea. A form of sensory learning or unlearning comes into play. So then I go into direct sensory learning being important in design as well as Zen. And maybe one more, we're running out of time. Which section this is in? Okay, so this is in adapting Zen to life. Or no, this is in the senses, this is still in touching. Touching, this is down to touching now. This is where we were in touching. Let's see. Natural posture, natural breath, natural mind is the caption for this section. Remember the way Zazen works, its magic is primarily physical. Sitting in upright posture, the body begins to teach you the natural posture. Following your breath begins to show you the natural breath. Listening to your thoughts, we begin to get beyond attachment to and dependence upon thinking. We penetrate to our natural state of mind. In this sense, Zazen becomes a natural teacher. Fortunately, it is always accessible, unlike human teachers. But Zazen can be a difficult taskmaster. My teacher would often say, you have to work your way through every bone in your body. And there are lots of bones in your body. My senior Dharma brother, Kongo Roshi at CBTC, in Buddhist Temple, Chicago, titled one of his recorded talks, Sitting with Muscle and Bone. A popular book from the early days of Zen in America is titled Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. Zazen is a visceral, intimate, gut-level practice, not merely a mind game. You may have heard an anecdote about Master BohdiDharma, 28th patriarch in China, India, first ancestor in China, when he decided to return home. I may be a bit redundant there, I'll probably take that line up. When he decided to return home. I read this one last time and made a joke about him being homesick. This incident may have inspired the phrase, Zen flesh, Zen bones. Before departing, this is the quote, he called his disciples to him in order to test their realization. The first disciple he questioned answered, the way I understand it, if we want to realize the truth, we should neither depend entirely on words nor entirely do away with words. Rather, we should use them as a tool on the way. BohdiDharma answered him, you have grasped my skin. The next to come forward was a nun who said, as I understand it, the truth is an auspicious display of the Buddha paradise. One sees it once, then never again. To her, BohdiDharma replied, you have grasped my flesh. The next disciple said, the four great elements are empty and the five skandhas are non-existent. There is, in fact, nothing to grasp. To this, BohdiDharma responded, you have grasped my bones. Finally, it was Huika's turn. He, however, said nothing, only bowed to the master in silence. To him, BohdiDharma said, you have grasped my marrow. The fourth student turned out to be BohdiDharma's lineage and successor, Master Huika. This is sometimes interpreted to indicate that the use of marrow implies a deeper level of understanding compared to skin, flesh, and bones. However, we should not be too hasty to take this view. Skin, flesh, bones, and marrow are all interdependent parts of the same body. Absent any one of them, the living being cannot survive. Skin and flesh, then, are equivalent to bones and marrow in their necessity. Skin is not shallower than flesh, notwithstanding the expression, beauty is only skin deep. Nor is flesh shallower than bones. Marrow may be at the center of each bone, but it is not at the center of the body itself. Does the body have a center, really? So then it goes on into getting comfortable in Zazen. Any comments around that one? We have to be careful, circumspect about how we interpret the meaning of these stories. So this is in thinking. This is in the category of thinking, and this is probably the last one we'll have time to do. Eventually, on the cushion or off, thought beyond thought, hyphenated, may occur. The thought of emptiness, the thought of Buddha, the Blessed One. Blessed but not because his is a holy thought. Zen's truth is vast emptiness, nothing sacred attributed to BohdiDharma, or nothing holy sometimes. Blessed because it is a great relief to finally put down the burden of judgmental thinking, as declared in the same poem. This poem I've been quoting, tiny poem from China. The burdensome practice of judging brings annoyance and weariness. What benefit can be derived from making distinctions and separations? In my comments, so thinking itself is not the problem, but rather how we use our faculty of thought and to what purpose we apply it. But our precious power of thinking becomes distorted in the service of our annoying and ultimately weary judgmental mind. So then I go into first, second, and third level Nen, which is another way of thinking about thinking. So, okay. Now I'm in vision, seeing, and this is the caption on this section is, "Do you see what I see?" Song. Who did that song? I can't remember his name. The blonde. All right. Anyway. In Zen, however, we learn. Oh, here it is. I'm talking about how important vision is. And for me personally, vision has always been the #1 sense, owing at least in part to my preoccupation, professional occupation with the visual arts and design sciences. Training in photography or drawing, for example, the thought is to, is thought to train the eye to really see. For whatever reasons, in design school, you learn it's not to produce the drawing, it's not to produce the photograph, it's to train yourself to see. Right? That's very different, right?
To see the end result before it is? To see the end result before?
No, to train yourself to see what you're already seeing. Like, because I've studied perspective and I draw in perspective, I see the way all these are sloping. I see all the way the verticals are converging. I see the way the horizontals are converging. I see that. The Greeks saw it too. And the Romans, they would curve their architecture so that it would correct for that, for the curvature of the eye. When you look at the buildings, the lines look straight. They were so big that if they didn't curve them slightly, they would look curved. Yeah. So all of the design and science is the same thing. You're trying to train yourself to see the data, right? In photography and drawing, it's the eye-hand coordination, yes, but it's trying to get you to really see what you're looking at. So the common expression, and for whatever reasons in Zazen, seeing seems to come alive after the first two senses settle down, after body and mind, thinking and physical sensation, then seeing can sort of come into prominence. Or in your case, maybe hearing can come forward. But first you have to get through this, the ones that are giving you all the trouble, right? The common expression, seeing is believing, reveals the primacy of sight in our normal hierarchy of the senses. We speak of seeing through deception and imagine extraordinary powers of sight, such as seeing in the dark, clairvoyance, or Superman's X-ray vision. Do you see what I see? In Zen, however, we learn that seeing is not believing. Our visual sense is not to be blindly believed, at least not in an unquestioning way. We also discover that we actually do see in the dark. If nothing else, we see the dark. And looking more closely, we see light in the dark, and vice versa. We see through the wall in the Zendo, as our gaze becomes fixed on a point beyond the wall. The wall is seen to be floating in the foreground of a larger sphere of vision, the total realm, or Datu, of sight. These assertions are not simply semantics or only a manner of speaking. They become more compelling and credible in Zazen. In the process of deeply examining your sense of seeing, freeing yourself of preconceptions regarding the nature of your own sight, you will come to see what I mean. But this does not mean that you see what I see, or that I see what you see, even if we are looking at the same scene. Master BohdiDharma weighs in on the importance of seeing, both in the physical sense, as well as seeing as understanding. To find a Buddha, all you have to do is see your nature. You should realize then that everything you see is like a dream or illusion. So I comment, so receiving, accepting sense data uncritically has been the tradition of, has been the tradition of seeing, of Zen from the beginning. Then going a bit further into the meaning of insight, if you don't see your own miraculously aware nature, you'll never find a Buddha, even if you break your body into atoms. The Buddha is your real body, your original mind. But this mind isn't somewhere outside the material body of four elements. So seeing in Zen involves seeing into the nature of mind and finding a Buddha, meaning waking up to the reality that's in front of your face. But a footnote on the atom of meaning of atoms indicates startlingly that this does not mean seeing reality as we usually see it. Here's the footnote. The early Buddhist Sarvastivadins recognized subatomic particles, which can only be known through meditation, perceivable only by the eyes of a bodhisattva. This rather remarkable assertion from ancient India takes us through the Zen mirror, challenging the seemingly fixed relative scale of perception, like Alice in Wonderland. This reflects the delimiting effect of seeing fixedly with gaze fixed on our ordinary perception. So the theory here is that if you sit still enough, long enough, all this begins to break down and you begin to see through seeing. You begin to see the other half, you might say, the rest of the story. So that's kind of the approach I'm taking in quoting BohdiDharma, because I'm making a lot of claims that are pretty outlandish, right, from my own experience. So the way I'm using quotes in here is to give me some backup, to say I'm not the only one saying this. I'm not making this up as I go along. Okay, we can take a few minutes. If anybody has to leave, please leave anytime you feel like it. We won't be insulted.
I find the text regarding the senses and the working with the senses very helpful. Because when I started really,
Did I send it to you?
Huh?
Did I send you this?
No, I didn't.
You just quoted
Yeah,
this part.
yeah, because it's just for me, especially when I was starting with this book, I noticed myself working with that. I didn't really know what it was until even with the sound is very. It used to take me. My mind used to go with whatever sound, and I'd have to pull myself back, and I'd be gone like with the train. So for me, it was very helpful to just notice them, recognize that they're there, but just not get so carried away with it. So it's just kind of I find this working with the senses. The text and the conversation very helpful, especially with talking about how you work with newcomers and related to that, and how I know I had my own experience with that a long time ago, so it still happens.
The music analogy is helpful in that, like the music of the spheres. You can regard the train as here comes the percussion. Here's the rhythm section coming through, right? And you can establish a little distance between your experience by just using analogs like that. And it's all music, so I'm listening to this as music. I'm not listening to it as discriminating. That's a train, or that's a this, or that's a this. That's what I said about the birds. I'm blissfully ignorant that I don't know. I can't identify bird calls, but I kind of like it because I can just hear them, and I don't have to make a second level judgment. Oh, that's a cockatoo, and that's a this or that. There are a couple I know whippoorwill. Maybe that's one or two of those.
Yeah, it's like something I noticed my mind wanting to the characteristics of the mind wanting to grasp onto something and go there. Again, yet another aspect of working with that.
All of a sudden, you find yourself down the rabbit hole of binomial nomenclature.
Right. Yeah.
No end to it.
Oh yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, everybody wants to get going. Let's get going. So we'll do the Dharma closing. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. The regions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha ways unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. I want to make one other point on donations. I think we should survey to see how people would conveniently want to do their donations. And everybody said nobody carries cash anymore, for instance. So, you know, is that a worthwhile question to ask and see? You know,
If there was some way to Venmo donations, people might.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really.
PayPal, right?
Venmo,
Yeah, Venmo's the thing.
like the Square Cash
can you
app.
young people work on
Yes.
that?
Yeah, I was paging through the Square app on the iPad up front. And I think we could stand an upgrade to the Square card reader so that we could use the chip function. And it also has Venmo built into it when you
I
upgrade.
have
that.
one at home that I'm not using that I bought for a retail situation that isn't happening. That maybe I could bring it in. Well, maybe we should just buy
Is
it.
it square?
Mine is Square, yeah, but it has that little
Yeah.
thing. you can stick
Well,
it.
I'll
You
have
can
to.
insert the card into it. Yeah, we just insert it into that and it'll upgrade.
I just have to check to make sure
Can you
that
guys
that iPad's going to
figure it out?
support
You're
it. Yes.
tech savvy and you can just
Yeah.
give us a next.
Yeah, that's a great Venmo's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
It's beyond me. I don't know. how these things-
Yeah, if you say the word Venmo to those college students, their ears will perk up. They will.
It's like, oh, I have a dollar.
Oh, yeah.
I'm still carrying
Yeah, like, I
seashells.
don't know how I got it. Yeah. Like,
Carry shots.
Wampum. Thank you for your patience and listening. I hope